Quindi diciamo con questa raccomandazione io non prendo ulteriore tempo e passo immediatamente la parola ai relatori, intanto ringraziandoli per essere intervenuti a questo interessantissimo seminario, e cedo la parola alla dottoressa Elena Abreu Lopes dell'Eurosai, che come sapete è l'associazione che cerca di coordinare le istituzioni di controllo in ambito europeo. Grazie professoressa, grazie dottoressa, a lei la parola.
Told me that I could speak in Portuguese, but I'm not sure that you would understand. I know that our languages are familiar, but they are not so familiar, so I think that maybe English is better. I thank very much, I do thank the University of Pisa, Professor Colombini, and Professor Gettit for inviting me. It is really a pleasure to be here in such an interesting seminar, and in a seminar that highlights the importance of ethics, which is something that we cherish in this group that I'm going to tell you about. I also thank the professor of the session for your kind words and for taking your time to chair the session. And please let me also highlight the presence of my colleagues from the Italian Court of Auditors and from the European Court of Auditors. They are good friends, and we have been working together for a long time. Eurosai, as you mentioned, is the organization of the Supreme Audit Institutions in Europe. The Supreme Audit Institutions in Europe are not the same. They belong to different systems, and we have here two different systems. Portuguese Court of Auditors and the Italian Court of Auditors, they have jurisdictional functions, and the European Court of Auditors, it has no jurisdictional functions. So we try to harmonize criteria for working in similar ways, respecting our different kinds of competences. And this organization realized in 2011 that ethics was an important issue. The financial control, as you mentioned, used to be quite technical. Looking into the accounts, checking if those accounts respected the accounting rules, or looking also into the rules and judging if the public management practices respected the rules that were included in the public law. As time went by, and as public management systems evolved, financial control also had to evolve, because nowadays public management also has to be implemented according to principles, to objectives. We all know about the public management movement, but after that it also evolved, and nowadays it is considered that public governance includes a lot of criteria, not only objectives, not only rules, but also principles of, and one of them is public interest. Public management has to pursue public interest. And so the financial control also has to include that approach, because public managers are very effective, but they are not realizing the public interest that they should be realizing, then it is not a good public management. And so Court of Auditors need to also consider this approach. And as I told you, in 2011 they realized that they would need to study a little bit how to do this. And this task force was created, the Task Force on Audit and Ethics, with the main goal of promoting the relevance of ethical conduct and integrity, both in the courts, both in the Supreme Audit institutions, and also in public organizations. Because we also realize that if we are going to approach this, if we are going to judge or to assess public sector bodies according to ethical criteria, we won't be very successful if we are not examples of ethics ourselves. And so this group tried to build up on this issue in these two ways, in these two approaches: how to increase our ethical management within our own institutions, and also on how to include an ethical approach in our audit activities. Many Supreme Audit institutions of Europe have been joining us during this period. This was supposed to be a task force working for 3 years, but what happened was that many Supreme Audit institutions found that they wanted to keep on working on this and joining this this group that at the beginning was very small. And I think that we are happy to say that in this 9 years of activity, close to 9 years of activity, we have been influencing some changes in the way these audit institutions work in this field. What have been the main initiatives and achievements of this group? We started by identifying what happened in every audit institution of Europe, how they looked into their own ethical management, how they looked into their role to promote an ethical management in their public sector organizations of their countries. And during this kind of stock taking, we have identified and concluded that these institutions were at very different levels. Some of them gave importance to this issue, and some of them did not give enough importance to this. We produced several events and several papers identifying these practices, sharing them among all of us in order for us to see what others were doing and how we could improve that. We looked into those practices and compared them with a benchmark, and the benchmark we used at the beginning was mainly the OECD one. What was the best practices that were recommended by the international organizations in what concerns ethical management, and we have compared them and concluded that there was a lot to be done. One of the first activities that we also engaged was to participate in a very active way in the review of the ISAI 30. ISAI 30 is the code of ethics of Supreme Audit institutions. Supreme Audit institutions have a worldwide organization. It's called INTOSAI, International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions, and this organization issues standards, audit standards that all Supreme Audit institutions have to comply with, and they have and these standards are called ISAIs, International Standards for Supreme Audit Institutions, and this ISAI 30 is one of them, and it is the code of ethics for auditors and for Supreme Audit institutions. When we start our work, it was also the time to review this standard, and we joined this work in INTOSAI, and participated very actively in this review. And ISA 30 really changed a lot under some of our proposals as well. And ISA 30 is now quite demanding on supreme audit institutions in what relates ethical management of SAIs. And one of the important things where it changed is that it is now very clear for supreme audit institutions, and this applies also to public organizations, it is now very clear that ethics is not only a matter for individuals. Of course, ethics relates with individual behavior. It is always the individual that chooses to do the right thing or the wrong thing. But the organizations where individuals work have to do some active work in order to create an environment where individuals can adopt the correct behavior. They have to support individuals, they have to create guidance, they have also to control, they have to monitor the ethical behavior and to promote it through several activities. And ISA 30 is now very strongly written around this idea that it is a responsibility of individuals, every individual in the organization, not only the auditor, but it creates also a responsibility for supreme audit institutions to create this environment where people can in fact adopt the correct behavior. And this movement also happened in the international guidance on this matter. If you look into the OECD framework, there was a new recommendation adopted about public sector integrity, I think last year, and this new recommendation also evolved in this way. It says that public integrity has several pillars, and these several pillars include the responsibility of the organizations to create environments that promote public integrity by their own employees. We also understood that this issue is not only about technicalities, it is quite about culture and quite about promoting and raising awareness of people. We know that some of the most respected institutions in our several countries, they can come down very easily if someone acts incorrectly. And this has been happening in every country in Europe. Sometimes we have this very well respected organization and suddenly there is a scandal and they climb down. This happened, as you know, in audit companies, this happened in banks, and this happened also in supreme audit institutions. So there is this obligation of watering what we do to the plants. We give them water every day, so we have to take care of it. It's not only something that we could do today and it is done. No, we have to keep on working on this every day, and we have to work with people. And so raising awareness is very, very important, and sometimes we are in this kind of sessions making speeches, very good speeches, and it may happen that we have no results with these speeches because people are not understanding or not paying attention. Sometimes there is just one word, that there is this click that produces a lot of results. So this is an issue, a subject where this is very important. So we tried to have initiatives and materials for raising awareness and to keep giving the same message. This is an issue where what you have to say is not very much. You used to say ethics is about doing the right and wrong. There's nothing more about it. But you have to keep on saying this and trying to produce a sensitive message that touches the hearts of people. And so we have done a lot of workshops, meetings, produced some papers and leaflets based on those workshops. These are the words of the people that were in the workshops. We try to work on the contributions of people we are speaking to. And we also made this video competition, which proved to be very interesting, because we were discussing that this is a matter where sometimes a word, an image or an image speaks louder than words. And we asked colleagues from the several institutions to produce their own videos about this. This was a way of them to think about it and to raise their own awareness. And answering to the expectations and to the requests of the peoples we were working with, they asked us also to produce some guidance, and we have produced this guidance in the two levels that were working with. One, guidance on how to implement the revised Design 30. As I mentioned, this code of ethics of InterZai was reviewed, and so after the revised version was approved, we produced this guidance on how to implement it in supreme audit institutions, and this is the guidance that we produced. It is available in the task force website. I give this to the university, and we also produced another one about how to audit ethics in public sector organizations. So how to improve our own ethics and how to include an ethical approach in our audits. Again, look at it. I also brought some CDs and some leaflets. They are all for you. But everything is available in the task force website, so the easiest way is to download them from our website. But we realize that in this digital world, people like a lot the paper. Well, that's what we understood. We have a lot of electronic documents and no one knows about them. So sometimes the paper is impressive. Maybe you can circulate the guides so people can look at them. Thank you. So that's the main areas of our activity. We have tried to work also with other partners. This is a matter that several organizations are working, and so we worked with supreme audit institutions not only from Europe but from other regions that were also working in this issue in a way that we could profit from all the inputs and from all the ideas. We have worked with other working groups that were working in areas where the unethical conduct is a risk, like public procurement. We have been working with the internal auditors, because the internal auditors also are aware that they have a very important role in this matter, and sometimes a more effective role than the external auditors, because this ethical thing makes people frightened. People don't like very much to show their weaknesses. And the external auditor is a little bit frightening, so they prefer not to show themselves. And sometimes the internal auditors has a more favorable field to work here. We have been working with OECD, with the European Institute of Public Administration, with some experts from the Council of Europe, with some universities that have been working in this issue, and every time we have a meeting we try to involve also some national institutions that are related with transparency and ethics. We have been having also some contacts with representatives for Transparent International and so on. We have used tried to use some methods like e-learning, and we realized that involvement is very important, and so we have used the opportunity of our meetings to always meet with the staff from the hosting institution in order to promote our message, to listen to their opinions and incorporate their contributions in our work. I already mentioned the guidance on how to implement ISAI 30, and this guidance includes some advice on how to implement the ethics control system, what we call the set of measures that the organization should put in place in order to promote an ethical conduct. We have included in this guidance some examples of policies, measures, and instruments that the organizations could use to favor the ethical behavior, and this means identifying some good practices that have been adopted in several Supreme Audit institutions. But what I am here to talk to you about is mainly the second goal, which is how can Supreme Audit institutions promote integrity in public sector organizations through their audit work. What we concluded when comparing the practices of Supreme Audit institutions is that these institutions were not completely aware of the possibilities that they could explore in this field. Some had initiatives, some were not aware of them, some have even had doubts about their mandate, about whether they were able to act on this field according to their competence established in the law. But many expressed the interest that we could develop some common methods and some common tools to be used. And that's what we tried to do. We identified that we had mainly these problems, some doubts about the mandate of as Supreme Audit institutions, some different concepts about what is ethical, what is legal, what is illegal, what is unethical. There was some misunderstandings about these concepts. We also identified that people use in the different countries different terminology and different concepts on what is acceptable conducts and desirable controls. There was a lot of difficulty in finding criteria because auditors have to have audit criteria. They have to compare, they have to judge public management, and they have to do it according to criteria. And this is an area where the criteria is not very clear. Auditors are usually used to measure, and this is also an area where measurement is very difficult, and the tools to measure were not available. And so these were the main problems that we tried to face. We reduced this to these 5 important questions. Why do audit ethics or integrity? Why should SAIs do it? To know whether SAIs have mandate to audit ethics or not, if they need it or not, an explicit mandate to do this. Which ethics-related issues could SAIs audit? How to do it in terms of methodology and standards and criteria, and how to report on this. And this guideline tried to answer these questions. So the main chapters of this guideline, I Suprema. The main chapters is precisely this, the answer to these questions. We have included also a list of links and a list of examples that we can consult to see how other institutions have done it. Why? We have concluded that the Supreme Audit institutions are clearly now guardians of good governance and not only guardians of correct accounts. And so good governance includes the ethical approach, includes the public interest. There is no good governance without safeguarding the public interest. And if SAIs are the guardians of good governance, there is no need for an explicit mandate to do this, because most of SAIs have this mandate of looking into public management according to good management principles. And this is quite clear in the United Nations documents. It is quite clear in the recommendations of OECD, where Supreme Audit institutions are considered as one of the pillars of public sector integrity. And this is also very clear according to several standards of Supreme Audit institutions issued by the INTOSAI. So we concluded that though, provided that the Supreme Audit institutions has a mandate to judge according to principles of good governance, there is no need for another explicit mandate to work in this area. What could Supreme Audit institutions audit? We are speaking about ethics and integrity. Supreme Audit institutions look into public management also, not only to detect what was wrong, but also to identify the way that public organizations manage the risks that they face. And this is an area where we are mainly speaking about risks. We shouldn't look into public organizations to find out if the behavior of their managers or their agents is correct or incorrect. We should mainly look into the public sector organizations to see if they realize the risks that they face and if they do something about them. Of course, when we speak about the institutions that have jurisdictional powers like mine and like Italian case, we can identify some malpractices and we can sometimes sanction them, or at least refer them to the public authorities that have the powers to investigate the malpractices or the wrongdoings, or even the crimes, because when people act unethically, sometimes they are committing crimes, they are committing corruption crimes. Sometimes they are, sometimes they are not, but in many cases they will be committing corruption. But our main role is not to identify those cases which are very difficult to identify. In fact, it is the judicial authorities that have more conditions to do that. Our role is not that. Our role is to make sure that the public sector organizations realize that they have something to do on this and that they are really taking measures to prevent these situations from happening. There's no system where we can avoid the unethical conduct. That depends precisely on the individual, and we don't control all individuals. But we can, as public organizations, do some things to prevent, to promote that these situations are not so high. What kind of initiatives could Supreme Audit institutions do? Many of us do compliance audits. Compliance audits are those audits where we check if public management was conducted according to rules, to established rules. In compliance audits, this is quite small here. In compliance audits, we could include questions about if activities and operations comply with applicable rules and standards, because it is quite common, mainly in our southern countries, that these ethical standards and ethical rules are included in the law. It is sometimes quite common that we have prescriptive rules to have codes of conduct and to act in a certain way. So we could look into how these prescriptive rules have been complied or not. But this is not enough. This could, in financial audits, which is quite a traditional activity, we could also include an ethical approach, because the environment, the control environment of an organization includes ethical considerations, and so we could include kind of a part of the financial audits where we could ask if the financial statements were affected or have been affected by distortions resulting from fraud and corruption or not. But this is quite a traditional approach. So now we are getting to a more interesting approach, which is to include this in performance audits, asking if performance results were affected by unethical practices and what could be improved in these public sector organizations to make sure that we favor an ethical conduct. There are some institutions that have forensic powers, and this could also be a field to work in, but we reach what in this guidance we consider the ideal situation, which is to make audits that are focusing on ethics and integrity. And in this case, our question would be if management identifies and properly manages ethical risks in a public organization or activity, and what they could do better. I think that Eduardo will have an example of that. I imagine that you will show one of your audit cases. No? You no? Sorry. But for instance, in our own office, we are now conducting an audit about the way the disasters were faced. As you may be aware, we had some forest fires, very serious forest fires in the last few summers. A lot of people died and a lot of property was damaged, and so there were a lot of support to rebuild. And we are looking into this rebuilding effort to see if ethical considerations were duly taken in account, because this emergency public funding is sometimes quite affected by ethical considerations and even fraud. So there are a lot of possible approaches. There are some Supreme Audit institutions that do this according also to, not to audits, but to raising awareness activities. They are participating in seminars, in conferences, trying to raise this issue, or are conducting, for instance, surveys that raise the awareness of public sector organizations without necessarily being an audit. For instance, the Hungarian Supreme Audit Institution, they are conducting every year a survey about how public administration bodies are acting according to several principles of public sector integrity. They listed the desired measures that they should have, and they issue a survey about this. The public sector organization, they just look into the list, they answer. This is not an audit, this is not confirmed, but the public sector organizations, when they look into this survey, they realize that they have things to do, so this raises awareness, and it is a possible road. The important thing about this, when working with this, is that we should go behind compliance. Compliance is not enough, and we should consider also cultural dimensions. And this means working in a different way. This means that audit cannot be done in the traditional way, but it has to include some cultural dimensions. And this brings us to the methods, and there are a lot of important things that you can find in this guidance, where you can see that the audit needs to be conducted in a different way. It has to find out the proper criteria. It has to use methods that are not common. It has to consider the opinions of people, the perceptions of people, which is not a common thing for auditors. And it also must consider some specificities in reporting, because we are reporting on a sensitive issue. This was an example. And we include in our guideline also some hints about what should be done and what about should not be done, and the communication and the use of the communication methods should be the most important things. So I know that I've gone behind my time. I will finish, hoping that you will look into these documents and find them interesting, and hoping that our new role could be useful for public management. Thank you so much.